Good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to a very, very, very special episode of Dialogue with Dozie. Alongside me is guest host tonight is Dr. Rick Holton. Doc, how you doing tonight, sir?
I am doing extremely well, and certainly happy and feel lucky and blessed to be here with you.
You honor us every time you consent to be with us, Doc. My co-host, my brother KB Kim Bonner, will be with us a little later. I'm wearing black tonight. I'm wearing a suit. No busted cap tonight. This is in honor of Dr. King, who only wore black suits. He probably wouldn't be too happy about this mixed tie, but he thought that the gospel was a formal affair, and we honor that. Tonight we have this very special show. We're going to look at Dr. King's impact on America's society, on America today, and just kind of compare it and see where speculate where would he be on what would be his take on some of the issues that we're bringing on tonight. Doc, how has your King Day been? What all have you been able to observe or take part in?
Well, I watched some of the parades, and most of the parades that I had a chance to see were virtual today, along with having some discussions with some of my friends and former colleagues about some of the concepts of Dr. King and how it relates to what we're talking about and what we're doing in today's time. So this has been an extremely important, not only just important, but a critical day in my life with respect to Dr. King.
I can't think of a more critical time period to examine his legacy in America's society beyond this transition that we're going through and transformation we're going through as a country today. So let's bring on our panel. We have an awesome panel today. To sit down with us, several people had a few last minute issues, and we're making through.
I know.
You see. Coming back with us again, Dr. Douglas Kearse, seminary classmate of mine. Also, Barry Farmer, who is a member of the Libertarian Party, and Barry is going to bring in the principles and concepts of that party as he would think they would relate to Dr. King in regards to some of the issues that the nation is facing today. And Dr. Don Minshew, I'm just so glad to have him on. I looked at him for some assistance, and he consented to come on. He's a scholar, and he lived his formative years in Memphis not too long after the assassination of Dr. King. He comes on as a theologian and as basically an eyewitness to the history of these issues. Yeah. And last but not least, and maybe she should have been introduced first. This is my cousin Daisy Grimes. Daisy Taylor Grimes is she's a Bethune-Cookman. She's the former executive director of protocol at Bethune-Cookman University, and I'm missing some of it. So please forgive me, Daisy. But she's on with us tonight, and you know what? We're going to move right into it, and this is going to be a kind of a different format tonight. We're going to ask our panelists questions, and they're going to give like a 3-minute response, and then anybody else who wants to respond to that question can do so. And Dr. Holton, now just until Kim signs on, the three of us will just sign off, rotating around. So, Doc, you want to take the first question?
Okay. The first question that I like to pose to the panel is I want you to think and really do some deep thinking on this. What would have been Dr. King's reaction to the Trump administration's overt and covert marriage to America's racist elements as you see it happening today? Can someone just give me a little feedback on that?
Well, I don't know if you own because I'm a woman. Okay, I didn't want to be the first one to say something, but I think he would have dealt with it the way he dealt with Bull Connor and George Wallace and Strom Thurmond and all of the other racist individuals that he had to deal with during that time. It really hasn't changed that much, in my opinion. And I think that he would have spoken truth to power. He would have, that's my feeling about what he would have done today. He would have been just as forceful about racism, about poverty, and all of these that was his mission. But he certainly would have done it in a fashion that he was doing it during that time.
Well, let me just focus a little bit more on that. And I know you're a Wildcat, so Wildcat really.
Oh my goodness!
But I like what you said. I like what you said. But do you think people of today would accept his response, his attitude, his vigor?
No.
Why not?
I think that the world has changed. I'm a product of the 60s. And I think some of the things that he was able to instill in us, it would be very difficult to instill in young people today. I don't think we would have been, I don't think young people today would go for the nonviolence and the mistreatment. I don't think that our country today would be mobilized around one person, especially with his philosophy. I think we're so diverse now, it would have been very difficult for what he was teaching us to do now, because you have to remember, I don't know how many on this panel my age or who really grew up around the civil rights movement, but we were coming out of segregation. We knew nothing but to fight for what we wanted. And we were willing to do that no matter what the risk was. I don't think people today would do that. Not the majority of us. Now, young kids will fight violence. I'm thinking about his philosophy on non-violence. Let them hit you, let them do all of that, and don't you fight right. And let's take the compassion and love. I just don't know if
No. Am I on?
we're there. Yeah.
I think that's a very insightful approach. I was thinking about when I read over the question. I thought when Trump, before he had an administration, when he was bragging about all the people that has endorsed him in 2015, David Duke was one of the early names that come up, and as somebody that has no history, no family history of being in a hard situation of systemic racism, I was shocked and appalled that somebody could get up and say that David Duke would endorse him. If I was running for president today in a million years and David Duke endorsed me, I would not tell anybody. I would not say anything about it, and I would try to quiet it if it ever showed up. Today's world of systemic problems are a little bit different because the Trump administration, at least early on, supported the China virus, and that's an insensitive feel for other nations and kind of blaming them for our whole 2020 pandemic issues. Trump said that Kamala Harris doesn't meet the requirements to be vice president. He obviously didn't have an idea of what the requirements were, and that's just disgraceful as a sitting president. He also he also said that Gonzalo Correll should recuse himself due to his Mexican heritage from a court case that the justice was sitting on, where he was going to rule in favor or opposed to Trump's personal stuff that he was doing. I think if Dr. King was alive today and had any kind of weighing in on anything with the Trump administration, it would be against a whole lot of what they stand for and what they do. I'm not certain about covert activities. That's just speculation. But these are public record where people are saying stuff and things are being done, and it's really disgraceful on a human level that a sitting president can have ideas and just spout them off just because it enters his mind and comes out of his mouth, and it's disgraceful, and it just divides America.
Dr. Kearse, let me ask you. This has been a special season. I heard one commentator refer to it today as sandwiched between the history of Barack Obama being the nation's first African American president. Rush Limbaugh referred to him as African American, but we'll ignore that line. And on the other side is Kamala Harris, the first woman of color to be elected vice president or to a presidential ticket. But sandwiched in between has been the most polarizing 4 years likely of our history. I know most of our history as far as leadership in the president. How do you think Dr. King would help to, what do you think he would do to kind of help to heal some of the hurt and the pain that has come from the polarization of these past 4 years? And we're not able to hear Dr. Kearse. Dr. Minshew, would you,
Can you hear me now?
Tell me
I can hear you now. Yes.
your name.
Hello, can you hear me?
Oh,
Yes.
go ahead. We got you now. Go ahead, Dr. Kearse.
I think the wisdom of Dr. King was centered around his Christian faith, number one, his biblical worldview, number two, which came across when he made the statement that is so famous. I have a dream that one day my 4 little children will grow up and live in a country where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I think that he would look at the actions and policies of people and not focus on their race. And as it speaks in terms of Barack Obama and Trump, I don't think that he would so quickly say how polarizing Trump was and not point out the ways that also some of the policy of Barack Obama polarized the nation as well. And sometimes people seem to tend to forget that even in this past election, there was no overpowering amount of people voting for Biden Harris. This country is divided. And in a conversation that I had with my wife, I think that Dr. King, of course, I don't want to be presumptuous, but I think he would point out how this nation never dealt with the South the way it should have at the end of the Civil War. How can you defeat half of the country, the states that seceded, and allow them to keep the emblems of their rebellion, the flag, the segregation, the discrimination, the hatred, everything that they were fighting to advance and make it the law of the whole land, make the whole land the way that they were. This country's white people allowed them to continue to hold on with their racist practices. There was some pushback, yes. There were laws passed, yes. But like Dr. King pointed out on one occasion, you can legislate behavior, but you cannot legislate morality. I think that a part of the problem, and I think King would have pointed it out, the only reason Trump could tap into what he was able to tap into, because what he was able to tap into was never really dealt with. You allow a warring faction that set out to overthrow the country and force the country to accept its ideology, and you treat them as a bad little brother and allow him to keep all of his toys and keep doing all the stuff he been doing, except he lost the war. But he had been allowed to hold on to all of the emblems of his rebellion and all of the hatred and everything else that went with it. And I think that Trump was able to tap into a lot of problem that had never been adequately dealt with. And so as a result, it was laying right there under the surface all of the time. And all he did was tap into it. I don't condone what he did, but had it been dealt with properly from the start, he wouldn't have had such a deep pool to draw so much water from that well. And until we deal with, as a nation, somebody like Trump and people like Trump, because don't fool yourself now, there wasn't no landslide victory for Biden. There's a whole lot of people who still hold to that old racist Confederacy. Is it changing?
I think,
yes,
Dr.
but it's still true.
I think that has been one of the more alarming things to many of us. That it was though King called the same score in the Electoral College a landslide. As we know, a few votes in a few votes difference in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia, and we have a totally different outcome. So we get that concept. However, I just think that I think God, since we bring in the theological question into this, Dr. Minshew, I think God used. I made the point when I raised the question that he was squeezed between 2 points of history, and I think that God used Trump to expose that America is still far from where we thought it was on the racial issue. Dr. Mitchell, what do you think about that?
I would disagree. And here's the problem. We cannot make this out to be a forum about race based on the outcome of the election.
Exactly.
We weren't trying to decide whether you're racist or not racist by the election. There were people who voted for Trump specifically because of policy matters that had nothing whatsoever to do with being for Black people or against Black people. There were people who voted for Biden who were voting for policy matters that had nothing to do with racial aspect. But Pastor, I'd like to go back to the original question. And the original question for me is how Dr. King would have responded to this. And I truly believe that he would have done exactly like our sister said. He would use the power of the gospel to confront behavior that was wrong. However, the sad fact is that the power of the gospel is diminished in modern American society. And our influence as Christians is diminished in a modern America. And nobody is listening to us based on the power of the gospel anymore. And this is part of our issue.
May I respond? May I respond to this gentleman?
I'm going to ask you, Pastor, I'm going to let you, but let me just say this. Isn't that what Revelation has already predicted, though? Aren't we just fleshing out the times of Revelation? I mean, we're not there, but we're certainly headed there. Wouldn't you say that, Dr. Kearse?
Yes, I wanted to dovetail on the gentleman that just spoke, and I agree with him because I didn't have the opportunity to flesh out all of what I was saying. Like, for example, you take a Barack Obama. He's the most pro-abortion president in the history of this country, even exporting it to other countries. And many believers, not based on race, know that that is wickedness, especially when the overwhelming majority of those aborted are African American. And that's only significant because you talk about racism, but that point doesn't come up. How much more racist can you be than to target and murder that many unborn Black children and the women are deceived into thinking that they're doing something good, when in fact they are murdering their unborn children. And when it is well known and documented that this is a plan that was put forth by an avowed racist, Margaret Sanger, to eliminate and exterminate the Negro race. And I'm not making this up. This is documented. And so to just simply point out everything at Trump, which he's nobody's saint, and just because a man smiles and is charismatic and is black, you cannot be, as a Christian, blinded to the wickedness that he helped to advance in this country.
Oh, let me say something. Let me say something. Let me say something.
Please do.
Let me say something to this brother. I'm always amazed when men want to talk about abortion.
Wow.
First of all, I am a conservative Republican and I'm a Christian. So let me clarify that. I've been a conservative Republican for over 45 years. But when we say abortion, I think we get it confused. Obama believed in the right for women to make up their own mind.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
That is
Well,
what he did.
Well,
He
listen,
believed
we
what
got the right to do all
said,
kind of sinning.
that we have
But,
the right as
but
women
when a nation
up
promotes
our own
wickedness,
mind. I don't need
God
a
is not in
man
favor of that.
telling me about what abortion is. And all of those who talk about that, oh, I'm anti, especially these Christians, we want to talk about, oh, I don't want. Jesus gave us, God gave us the right to make up our own mind and make foolish mistakes. He didn't take that right from us. So why do I have the right to tell you as another woman what you should do? That's between you and your God.
That
He
argument,
also
man,
say we don't
with
want
all due
abortion. We don't want to
respect,
feed them when they come here. We don't
with,
want health care when they come here. We don't
but
want to
listen,
provide education
ma'am,
opportunities.
ma'am,
So
with all due respect, that argument you just gave would be the same as saying you got the choice to decide to murder or not murder,
you do
steal
have
or
the
not
choice.
steal.
You
Steal
do
or
have the
not steal.
choice.
So you can't take the murder of unborn children and say men don't have the right to speak against it when it's
No,
not men.
man, look,
It's
sir,
not men. Let me
you're
finish,
missing one
please.
thing.
It's
You
not men. It's not men speaking against it. God says
no,
that you should
show
not
me
murder
where
these
that is. Show me where that
unborn
is.
babies.
Show
God
me
says
where that is in the scripture. Show
Psalm
me in the scripture.
139,
No,
Jeremiah chapter 1.
Oh,
there's nowhere.
okay.
Psalm
Let,
139,
okay.
Jeremiah
Let
chapter
us
1.
let us go ahead. Let us bring this back into focus. So this is going to be a hot show in a few weeks, okay?
Okay.
You mentioned one, Doug, and we've been kind with you when we've been having these discussions, but you guys
Yeah, let me
somebody
come
who's taking
back on that because it's
Yeah.
all African American women do not have abortion.
Yeah, and I think it's
You know,
I'm going to take this forward, and we're going to move on. Dr. Holton has another question, but I'm going to take this opportunity to see. I think it's unfair to label Barack Obama when that's the law of the land.
Right.
I really do.
Right.
When the question is, we did not have a full 8 years of polarized. The only people who were polarized during Barack Obama's term were the people who didn't want him as their president, and likely because of his skin color. And so this president has played into that thing from day one.
Right.
We want our country back. And he's played into it. It's been more than a dog whistle. He has just come right out and said that. But let's say that we gotta we're coming up to President's Day, and we'll bring both of you all back on to latch into that. Go ahead, Doc. Go ahead, Dr. Holton.
I like the argument, and that's how we get things done. And both of you have good points, but extremely. I really like what Ms. Grimes, what you said. You have a right, and we don't want to take away that right. But I want to go back to something that Barry mentioned, and Barry started talking about some of the things that was noticeable with respect to the Trump administration. And then Don came in and said some very, very powerful things as well. Well, when you look at the 6 principles of nonviolence, one of the principles that Dr. King talked about was number 3: attack forces of evil and not persons doing evil. And although we realize the faults of the Trump administration, it stands out like a sore thumb. I think the question was, if Dr. King was here and attacking that issue, what would he say? He wouldn't go directly at Donald Trump. He wouldn't attack the evil, but he would attack the forces, those things that's creating that particular evil. Now, that being said, in the letter from a Birmingham jail, Dr. King challenged the silence of the white church. How would he challenge the so-called evangelical church, which sleeps with the political right and has endorsed Trumpism? Panel, somebody attack that.
I think we have to go back to when all of this started. I just read a book on that because I participated in another panel discussion at Bethune about a month ago on faith and politics. You have to go back to the 70s with Jerry Falwell, with the evangelical movement, and what it really was all about abortion. And they really researched to see which political party could they participate in to control. The Republican Party back in the 70s, and I was working for Congress at that time, working for our U.S. congressman out of Fort Lauderdale. And the Republican Party did not trying to find their base. The evangelicals came in with Falwell, and the issue at that time was abortion. They really wanted to do that. They wanted to get, and they guaranteed that if the Republican Party would go with them, that they would give them a base. And so something as simple as that one thing has grown tremendously, from abortion to who they were going to have on the Supreme Court and all of that. My concern would be, why hasn't other religious groups stood up to them and talked about what the gospel of Jesus is? And I'm not talking about the 4 gospels. I'm talking about how Jesus walked and lived on this earth, and where he was, what he was from. Why hasn't the other churches gotten together and said, we will fight this evilness of these evangelicals? Because they're doing it for their own personal gain. It has nothing to do with religion. We all know that. So I
completely agree with Daisy. That's a really good point, and it reminds me of Dr. King's mention of dangerous unselfishness. I think he did that at the mountaintop speech. Basically, he was taking the parable of the man that was beaten and left in a ditch on the road to Jericho. And if we were in today's world with the evangelical church, and I'm a huge fan of all the work Billy Graham's done, but right now a lot of the evangelicals have this ideal of this is the way that Jesus is and this is how Jesus would have acted. But really, there's a lot of things that are getting neglected in our nation and in our world that the evangelical church could stand up and say, we are the church and this is what we need to do. And a lot of that's not getting done right now. And a lot of our brothers and sisters in Christ are being neglected, and they're crying out for help, and we're not addressing any of that. And I think Dr. King would say that we need to wake up, we need to see what's going on. And this is real world stuff that needs to be addressed. And he would address it in his mindset of dangerous unselfishness, that you need to go and you need to risk your life and go do this, and you need to risk your comfort and go and do this. You need to go and help these people. And it's not that you need to go and minister to people that are just a little bit worse off than you, but you need to go out and be willing to administer to the people that are in a really bad situation, that are maybe living in the really bad ghettos in somewhere far off. But if you can make their life better and you can get them up out of the mud, then everybody can start seeing clearly. And that's a lot of what I think he would be reaching for as far as the evangelical church of today. He try to bring them closer to Jesus. Sorry.
I think you're hitting it. I think you're hitting the nail on the head. And panel, I want you to glean in what Barry just said with respect to the letter. With respect to the letter, because there was a call for unity. Dr. King had a call for unity through that letter, and the white clergyman said, no, you don't do it like this. Now listen to what Barry just said. Listen to what he just said. Those are some he just talked the truth. And when he said that, we said, wait a minute. We can't get justice in the courts. We can't get it in the courts. So what we need to do is something that's nonviolent, which is the marches. You see that happening today. And we're going to talk about that. So I like what you said, Barry. I like what you said.
One of the things that I'm sure everybody on this panel realizes, even though it doesn't get talked about a lot, the Birmingham jail letter gets talked about a lot. But what doesn't get talked about as much is that Dr. King did not only deal with the hypocrisy of the white church, he had to deal with the hypocrisy from his own black churchmen who wanted to stop him, who wanted to silence him, who wanted to shut him up. And so what Dr. King would do, he wouldn't just focus all of his attention on one aspect of hypocrisy. He would point out the hypocrisy that's coming from every direction. And one of the things that frustrates me personally when I get on one of these panel groups, it seems that people just become with one side, like they can only see evil coming from one side and are blind to the evil that's coming from all different directions, regardless of political strife, regardless of whether they say they're conservative or say that they're liberal or whatever that they say that they are. One of the things I respected about Dr. King was he did not do that. He pointed out hypocrisy and evil and not doing what was godly, not doing what was biblical, whether it came from the white church, which he wrote on the side of that newspaper in the letter from the Birmingham jail. He didn't write such a letter to the black church, but he certainly addressed those in the black church that were against him and that were trying to stop what he was doing. And we tend, this is just my opinion, we tend to want to make every argument a one-sided discussion of that side over there, they're evil, and are blind to the evil that's coming from the other side as well. And that's what frustrates me personally when I get on one of these panels.
Well,
it's
Doc,
like people don't want to admit the evil that's coming from every direction.
You got to remember that he spoke, one of his principles talked about the beloved community. And that's what you're talking about. Some of us, and I've been in panels as well, and I've been in classes, I've taught this. Some of us, and particularly African Americans, think that we can take Dr. King and his philosophy and put it in our back pocket. That's not what he wanted. That's not
exactly
what he talked about. The beloved community, which meant everybody, the people of goodwill, people that look like me and people that don't look like me, people that look like Don and others that's on this panel. So this is what the beloved community looked like, which is what Dr. Kearse is talking about. Exactly.
But it goes further. We have to be careful. You guys just branded me. I've been an evangelical all my life. I am an evangelical. I will continue to proclaim the evangel until I die, because the evangel is the gospel. And to brand evangelicals as great evil is a huge mistake, because there are evangelicals who are part of the community of the beloved, who are right this minute active in reaching people who are poor and who are sick and who are desperate and people who are in need. And so when we brand a group of people in a particular way, we are diametrically opposite to what Dr. King would have stood for.
Amen.
Let me, because I was the one that said that. So let me clarify that, because that's not the intent. We said the evangelical because they have been the most vocal, and there are a few because I'm a part of the church also, and our church is an evangelical church, part of the evangelical. But our pastor speaks out against some of the things that have been said and done, and there are some that I know and I've read about who have spoken out against it. So when I say the evangelical, they were the ones with Jared Falwell who pushed a lot of this. And Senator Danforth's book shares all of the history on that. So it's not to condemn every person who is a member or a part of it, but those who are in there who are silent and have not spoken out. When you get a Graham that comes on last week and support and all this that Donald Trump has said that would happen last Wednesday, and he stands up as one of the leaders in the evangelical movement, then those are the consequences, because he says that he was right. I mean, and they have made it no secret that they are strong supporters of Trump and whatever he does, and that is not the gospel of Jesus.
Good. Well, let me throw this out at the group. Let me throw this out. How would Dr. King view Black Lives Matter?
I think Black Lives Matter.
Let me put a tag on what Daisy just said, please.
Go ahead.
I think I failed to properly introduce Dr. Minshew. He is the executive director of the Gulfstream Baptist Association, which is the local arm of the Southern Baptist Church in our region. So I understand his defense. Now, with that being said, I'm going to say this. I read Albert Moeller, who was a classmate of mine at Southern Seminary. He is, of course, the president of Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, which is a powerhouse in Protestant denomination now, and it's totally evangelical. He gave a defense as to why he was voting for Donald Trump, and a lot of it kind of went to what Dr. Kearse said. It was like solely the abortion thing. My issue is evangelicals. If we want to make them synonymous with Republicans, which I know is not totally fair, but majority-wise it is, there's a love affair with the fetus. And I'm a man of God, so I'm going to be all against any kind of murder. But there's a love affair with the fetus. But when you start talking about social issues taking care of the least last and left out, then that love affair comes to a drastic halt. And it's just my issue. Go ahead, Doc, with the next question. I just want to say.
Well, Dr. Dozie.
I want to steer up their hornet's nest.
Dozie, your co-host, he put the finger on the pulse of the whole approach that Dr. King would have, and when he spoke about the beloved community.
Right.
And when you speak of the beloved community, then you're talking about, in my view, a community that has as its foundational system of belief the Bible, and it's not just limited to abortion. It extends to the concept of the traditional family. It speaks to marriage between a man and a woman. It speaks to a whole approach to life that is a biblically based life. And when you have people in different church groups with different voices that accept different things, such as marriage between a woman and a man and a man, you have a lot of people who profess to be believers who do not agree with that. And I happen to be one of them. And so we get labeled as being Trumpism, when in actual fact, it's not that everybody who voted for Trump is Trumpism. Some of these people vote their values, and they understand that Trump is not perfect. And like I said earlier, you look at the evil that exists on both sides of the table, and it's not a choice of voting the lesser of two evils, because let's face it, evil is evil. It's just that people make a decision based on what they believe is the closest to a biblical value as they can get. And I guess they decide that if at least if a person is given the opportunity to live, they will be alive to struggle against the injustices that's in the world. But to be cut off before you even get a chance to struggle, you would cut off Booker T. Washington. You would cut off George Washington Carver. You would cut off John Kennedy. You would cut off any of these people who get the right to live and get the right to fight for whatever it is that they want to fight for. And I think we make a critical mistake, like the gentleman spoke earlier, when we just want to take a brush. The evangelicals, they ain't no good. This group, they ain't no good. We buy into the cancel culture, and we forget that nothing is ever really that simple. It's much more sophisticated than that. It's just like
Okay,
when the young man shredded the poison gourds in the pot. He shredded it into the pot. And I wrap up, it was shredded into the pot. That means that the pot is so mixed up with so much stuff until you are not wise when you try to just generalize everything, black and white, because that's not real. That's my statement.
Dozie,
Okay.
can I ask one question? May I ask a question?
Go
I
ahead.
know we can move on. But when we talk about all this right to life, I have not heard anyone, very few from any church, and I'm not going to say evangelical, but any, to go up against all of these people that Donald Trump have signed for the death chamber this last month, and the
Yeah.
ones that are going to die today. So we believe in the unborn, but we don't fight against gun control. We don't fight against the death penalty for
Right.
people. All of these things, death to be, if you're going to be against death, you're against death all kind of ways. So you
Right.
fight against, you fight to have gun control, you fight against the death penalty, you fight against all of it. My concern is that we do look at things based on our personal values and what we believe in. And so abortion is bad, but someone getting the death penalty is not bad.
But Ms. Grimes, here again, you are not
Let me
accurate in
move.
what you just said.
Doug, let
There
me
are
move the
people who fight
conversation
against the
along.
death penalty and
Let
fight
me
against
keep
all
it.
these things that you named.
Let me keep us on let's stay on. So we know we'll be back in a few weeks, somewhere at the end of February, somewhere in March. And Facebook is real funny. We project over Facebook and YouTube. What I want to do is a show dealing with the church's response to
You
the
gonna need 2 or 3 shows.
Okay, whatever we need to do. I want to do a show dealing with the church's community, the church's response to same-sex individuals, and we'll deal with all those issues. But let's stay with Dr. King tonight. We want to say to our viewers, please send your comments, and we want to post them so that the panel can look at them and discuss them. And if you want to come on and ask a question via the phone line, let that be known, and we'll see if we can make that possible tonight. We're running kind of close with time, so I want to move it along. Go ahead, Doc. You had a question, a very poignant question.
Yes. Let me say all points have been made extremely well. And we got some listeners out there that want to hear some other subject matter that we're talking about. I know we're dealing with Trump. And that's been the subject. We Trump out right now. So, minds out there, let's turn the page. Let's turn the corner for a second. Let's get off of Trump and let's get off of abortion. Question today: how would Dr. King view Black Lives Matter? What's your opinion?
I think the phrase Black Lives Matters, he would endorse. But the philosophy Black Lives Matters, he would not endorse. And so many people adopt the phrase without knowing the philosophy. And that is very dangerous. They are
Well,
anti everything that the Bible puts forth as normal, such as they want to do away with, and they come up with all of this cisgender, against heterosexual dominance, and all of these newfangled phrases that simply mean we want to accept all forms of relationships as equally valid. And it is an unbiblical worldview. And unfortunately, what has happened is, in my opinion, the just civil rights movement of the oppression of African American people has been hijacked by so many different groups that, in my view, have no moral standing biblically whatsoever. And that is not to hate them, that is not to condemn them to hell. That is simply to say they have hijacked the moral and just civil rights movement
oh,
and attached so many different things to it that I personally cannot get with. And I can't speak for Dr. King, so I don't know if he would go along with it or not, but I don't believe that he would.
That's on me, because that question should have been formulated to limit it to the protest, the Black Lives Matter protest movement. What's up, bro?
Hey, bro, what's going on?
You got it. It's hot, man. I'm glad to see you. Doc been holding it down, but it's pretty hot tonight.
Oh yeah, I tried to listen to it a little bit on the way home.
So that question should have been
With respect to the protest.
to the
protest,
yeah, not
all right.
philosophy.
Well, Don, I think you kind of talked a little bit about some of this. I'd like to hear your opinion on this. What would you say, sir?
I really believe that Dr. King would have understood the anger that came out during the whole George Floyd, Black Lives Matter emphasis. It was not a new thing in the Black community to have that sense of outrage and injustice. However, what Dr. King has called for consistently throughout his time was America living up to the values that America stands for.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that that was front and center of what was happening with those protests. It was a strongly politicized agenda with the defund the police and all of those kinds of things that got mixed into it. And so I think that Dr. King would have found himself in a difficult position as a man of peace and as a man of the gospel, and yet understanding the anger and the frustration that even after 50 years, that we still are not at a place where there is that sense of justice for Black people who are accused of things.
Okay, so what other issues would attract his attention today, in your opinion? What other issues do you see that might have attracted his attention?
I believe that he would not be a one-horse pony. That's one of the things that is important to remember about Dr. King was the vast intellect that he brought to the table. In those days, he was fighting for one particular agenda, and many of those things have happened. And so, much like we have heard tonight, he would have been involved in calling all Americans, not just Black Americans, not just white Americans, not a polarization, to what the gospel stands for and to the power of what happens when Christians take the truth and apply the truth to individual circumstances. What has happened with Black Lives Matter and those kinds of things too often is we have created movements rather than dealing with specifics. And I believe that Dr. King would have dealt with the specifics and called out those areas of specificity so that we would be unified rather than polarized.
Well, Ms. Grimes, you deal with a lot of our millennials and our college folk. What other issues do you see? You think Dr. King would have focused in on today?
I think Dr. King would have, as it relates to Black Lives Matter, he would have worked with that group, as he did with SNCC, who came out, and Stokely Carmichael and all of that. He would have tried to work with them. I think that unfairly, Black Lives Matter has gotten some bad publicity. I think their intent is right. And I think he would have been supported and tried to guide them. I don't think he would have walked away from them. I don't think he would have condemned them. I think he was progressive enough to know that times change, and these are young people. He could not have dealt with them the way he dealt with. I was a college student during that time. He could not have dealt with them today as he dealt with us. But I think he would have dealt with them, and he would have been supportive. And I do think that they have been unfairly judged. I think that their intent is good, but they need the wisdom of some of us who are older to work with them. But as it relates, say this, Dozie, but as it relates to this country, we as Americans want to believe that we have always been good and that we've always been this country of fairness. And I look at what's happening today and saying, if we talk about faith, I think God is trying to tell us something. I think that, and I think he keeps sending us through things because we don't learn the lesson. But you have to look at the history of this country. We took this country from the Indians. We have never made amends to that. Then we bring over a whole new group of people and enslave them. We never apologize in this country for that. I mean, there's so much wrong, so much sin in this country that we've covered up and covered up and covered up in pretense that we're this country that believe in all these values. And we do, but we're not. It's hard to say, but we're not showing it. We're not being the church, and we're not being the Christians and the America that we want to be.
Kim Bonner, go ahead. You have a question for Barry. I'm sorry.
Well, let me comment on what we're just talking about. Dr. King and you may have already covered this. I apologize about being late, but I rode in the Martin Luther King Day parade on a bicycle today, and afterwards we kind of did some things with the community after that. So I'm late getting in, but anyway, I'm here now, and I just want to say in response to what we're just talking about, and you may have already covered it, but Malcolm and Dr. King didn't see eye to eye when they originally met. So, the same thing probably would happen if you meet people from Black Lives Matter. I don't know if they would get along right away or not. But at the same time, I think they would make amends with each other and get along and make things work for the best, So and to answer your question, you said what was the next question you said?
Yeah, I think it's question 7 for Barry.
Right. Okay. In 1968, was America ready for Dr. King to expand beyond civil rights and become a human rights advocate, as in his opposition to the Vietnam War, or did it lead to his assassination? And if y'all want me to repeat it, I'm going to repeat that again. In 1968, was America ready for Dr. King to expand beyond civil rights and become a human rights advocate, as in his opposition to the Vietnam War, and did it lead to his assassination? Feel free to chime in.
Yes, sir. I don't think Americans should plan out what's going to happen. I don't think they're like, oh, Dr. King, he's kind of anti-Vietnam War. This isn't a good thing. We need to get rid of him now. I don't think that really works out. It's like, man, this guy has caused so much problems. We put him in jail. We beat him down. We sprayed him with water hoses. We shot his protesters with rubber bullets. We've done all this bad stuff to them, and they keep coming, but they don't get violent. What do you do? And I think this is just a way to say this guy has caused so much headache, so much strife, and we can't contain him. He doesn't capitulate to what we want him to do. So at the end of the day, they're like, well, just take him out. And whether it's a paid off thing and a scam to make it look like it wasn't race based or whatever, it neutralized a headache that a lot of police departments were dealing with and couldn't fully address. And at the time, there was a loud, saber rattling group of white people that were upset that he was out still talking, still drawing these massive crowds, and still causing a huge amount of headache for local enforcements. When he was in Memphis, he mentioned about how protests broke out days before he was there, and some glasses got broke in a shop front. All the other protests was going on, but the media back then in 1968 only covered the glass breaking and how horrible these protesters are. And that's nothing compared to what's going on today. And not just the BLM movement, but there's a lot of more violent things going on today because people are probably much more fed up and they're not being heard. Or they feel like they're not being heard. So I think his assassination wasn't to prevent anything from happening, but just that they were fed up and didn't know what to do. So they pulled a trigger and neutralized the threat. That's what I really think.
I think along with your comments, I think you got to keep in mind with the internet how people have allegedly planned for that what went on in DC. You know, they got on the internet, they planned on, you know, the attack that they had in DC. I think you have to keep that in mind because the internet wasn't around back then, you know. So you know, just in regards to your comments that you just made, you know.
Well,
let me weigh in on that question if I might. Let me just say to our viewers and to our panel, if you all can give me another 20 minutes, we'll try to wrap this show up. But we had an ambitious query tonight, and I think they're all relevant questions, and we're down on that list. But we want to take time to give this show its proper due. This comes around once a year. We want to do so. With that being said, I want to just briefly say this about the assassination. As long as Dr. King was leading Negroes, that's what we would call at that point, in marches, sitting at lunch counters, making cogent speeches and so forth, he just got beat across the head, jailed, and some of the things that Barry listed. But it wasn't until he spoke out against the Vietnam War, Dr. Holton, that the opposition was ramped up. Now, we've already spoken about, he had, Dr. Kearse talked about him having opposition from his own church. I know a person very close to us who questioned some of his tactics, some of his protest motives. Dr. J.H. Jackson, who was head of the National Baptist Convention, Bard, King, Jesse Jackson, Andrew Young, all of the Dr. King preachers from that convention, way until he lost power himself.
Jemison.
I'm aware of all of that. But it wasn't until Dr. King started speaking out against the war that you heard all of the communists, J. Edgar Hoover, really ramped up all of the opposition. And I'm a former law enforcement, and several of us here are. But I want somebody to prove to me that the FBI, who had started doing everything to try to implode Dr. King, didn't ultimately, because now he's in a position with his oratory and leadership skills, he's now in a position to lead young white America away from a very a war that really had this country divided right down the middle. And I think that it brought on his demise. And I really want somebody to prove me differently about that. And I hate to think that about the FBI, or I want to say J. Edgar Hoover, but he was a flawed man like everybody else. So, I mean, just kind of answer that if you would. I'm throwing that out to everybody. Dr. Holton, I know, you and Daisy and several, Dr. Minshew, several of you all were around and saw the whole process. But that's just out to anybody. I guess please weigh in on that. Our viewers weigh in on that.
I have to agree with you, Dozie. I think I'm here understanding what you're saying. But I really do believe that J. Edgar Hoover had much to do with the assassination of Martin Luther King. I mean, he did everything to destroy him morally. They had him taped. They even had he devised where he turned other African American leaders against Martin Luther King. I mean, when Martin Luther King was killed, there were several prominent African Americans who were fighting against him. And I do believe that the FBI had much to do with his assassination.
Yeah.
Good.
I've
Anybody
heard,
else?
I've heard, and just to hone in just a little bit, I've heard that same argument, and I've heard people say, "Well, look at this. When you're dealing with war, you're dealing with a lot of money. You're dealing with you start bothering with that, you start hitting the wrong buttons. We got to stop this. No, it's not about that." So they took him out. This is
Amen.
yes.
I can believe that too. I can believe that too. That money.
I really, yeah. I think that was Dr. Holton. I think that was President Johnson's conundrum. The stimulated economy as a result of the war, and we could probably make that same contrast or comparison over in the mid 2000s with the Gulf War, the second Gulf War, that almost bankrupted this nation. So I think that's a. Let's move on.
I got a question from a viewer, Dozie, if I can
Go
throw
ahead.
it in real quick. And I try and monitor the viewers so we can honor their questions and they can chime in with these conversations. Brother Muhammad just sent in a question asking, it's stating, well, he was saying that the United States government settled the lawsuit in civil court, paying a settlement to the King family, whereas the U.S. government accepted responsibility for his assassination. Why isn't this part of his legacy ever? Why is this part of his legacy ever mentioned? So he's questioning, why was the government recognized responsibility for his assassination? And his question is, why isn't that ever mentioned in his legacy?
Hey, is anybody on this panel can answer that? Because I think I'm a pretty astute King follower in anything. I've read numerous books. I never knew that. I do know this, just adding on to it. James Earl Ray, who seen, and I don't want to use poor language, but James Earl Ray was just an everyday fella. And there was an assassination attempt on his life while he was at Brushy Mountain State Prison in Tennessee. So I know how that works, but I never knew that a settlement had been reached. That's news to me.
So yeah, I would take the comment as truth, as that there was a settlement. I've not researched it myself to know, but I can tell you I fully believe that the U.S. government hides and covers up as much information that makes us look negative. But as a nation, we lost the Vietnam War, but we never recorded that war as a loss because it was a military action. It wasn't fully a war because we didn't destroy them and win. And we just rearrange what history books say. So I'm sure the viewer is correct in what they're saying, but I've not researched it myself. And I would say that the U.S. government just hides as much of that information as they can. They never bring it to the surface, and therefore it never gets discussed. And if it's never discussed, it didn't happen. And there's a flood of information every day. And as Americans, we're going into a new Middle Ages where there's so much information. We turn off our minds and we turn off our ears, and we don't want to know. It's easy to hide information in plain sight.
I'm gonna direct this next question to Dr. Minshew. And Doc, am I pronouncing your name correct?
Yes, sir, Minshew.
How to do it. Please help me if I'm wrong. The next question, and prior to the question after that, we're going to ask Janet to chime in 90 seconds or less. She's going to give the background to the question after this question. Well, let me just ask this question. And I have a lot of passion about this. This show kind of has arisen out of some battles I've had with brothers and sisters that I serve with in law enforcement and other brothers and sisters of a different political ideology than mine. But the question I really want to ask is, and let me say this, I just kind of get frustrated. It looks like others want to pick our leaders, and that really frustrates me because nobody has that ability to do that for me. You can't tell me who I follow. If as a man of God, if God if I'm following the wrong person, then I believe that the God in me should convict me, and I should do the appropriate thing. But Doc, I'm going to ask you this. Dr. Minshew, I'm going to ask you this, and Dr. Kearse is back on. What leaders today in the civil rights community most closely mirror Dr. King's leadership or vision for America and poor America?
You know, I think that we don't have superlative leaders who stand above the rest like we had with Dr. King. There were some great men around Dr. King who have emerged in those years afterwards, but they were in his shadow. He had the voice and he was a conscience. And I think that's one of the things that we need to remember is that when we are dealing with conspiracy theories, was it because he was getting into the Vietnam War as opposed to racism? Is that why he was killed and all of that? That was a very violent time. Bobby Kennedy was killed. We have George Wallace in an assassination attempt. It was a violent time, and I'm not so sure we're not moving back into that kind of violence in our society, because people, sometimes individuals, run amok. Sometimes it's groups. So I don't know of a leader who stands to that degree as a civil rights leader. When you're in a country where, as we've already talked about tonight, we have had an African-American president. We now have an African-American vice president. The same needs of that voice don't exist, because we are not just speaking truth to power, but right now we actually see those of African descent who have power in the United States of America.
Dr. Kearse, I'm going to direct this to you. Let me ask you, and this is as direct as I can be with this question, and we're going to move on to Jan with the next one. How do you see the forums and opportunities that Reverend Al Sharpton has? How do you measure his? And Dr. Minshew, I've got to say this. Dr. King was tall cotton, so who can compare to him? Oratory, leadership, anointing. I mean, that's asking a lot. But how do you view Dr. Kearse, Reverend Al Sharpton, who is basically the one in the limelight, is the preeminent civil rights leader of today's society? How do you feel about him as a leader of our people?
Well, listen, I believe that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., first and foremost, I believe that he was an end-time prophet. He was the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He was a prophetic voice, and he had a special anointing from God to speak to this nation about this nation's evils and ills, particularly with racism and poverty and issues of that sort. And you have to be a person of a certain character, a person with the mantle and calling of God upon your life, that people hear you. And I don't want to sit here and try to compare the Reverend L. Sharpton to Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I can just make the observation. Dr. Sharpton certainly does not have the weight, the following, the impact that a Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. would have. And from my perspective, I believe that God Almighty has to raise up persons like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. who come along to speak a word backed by the powers of God himself that is hard to ignore, that bring about a change that only God could bring about. And so I think that prayer for God to raise up persons, because I don't think that one person will be able to address and speak to effectively everything that is intertwined to bring down society today the way it is today. You have so many converging issues that are all mixed up and intertwined together. It's going to take someone almost with a surgical morality given to them from God and an insight to be able to speak the truth in love in a way that people will be compelled to listen whether they want to or not.
Does anybody else have a short response in that regard about, I'm asking directly, I've already stated that nobody can be Dr. King, but with the forums of a national TV program and national TV appearances, and he is the one that families call in and a lot of these shootings, how do you all, I want to ask the panel for a very brief response, how do you feel about Dr. Al Sharpton standing in as a preeminent leader of civil and poor rights for poor people? Anybody?
I agree with the most recent comments made. No, Sharpton is good. He does what he does, but there's no comparison with Martin Luther King.
I guess I'm already saying that. That's the starting point.
And I don't know if there's anyone else. I don't know if there's anyone else, Reverend Bonner, that I see today, and I deal with a lot. I mean, I just don't see anyone on the national scene that has taken that role or can take that role right now.
You know,
I would like to add one quick thing.
I really like. I want the panel to kind of concentrate on what I'm about to say. I had an opportunity to speak with Mrs. King before she passed away. And one of the things that she said to me was that I wish and I hope that the teachings of my husband will never, ever, ever go away and will be done throughout the world. That being said, I had an opportunity to join hands with the Dr. Bernard Lafayette, who was one of Dr. King's confidants, and we took a group to Nigeria, and we continued to teach some of the concepts of Dr. King. There are about 360 gangs that are in Nigeria, and all of them were fighting. They were kidnapping these shell oil executives and blowing up the oil rigs. So I look at Dr. Lafayette, I look at Ms. Grimes, I look at Dr. Don, I look at some of those folk that's sitting on this panel. I look at a lot of folk in our community as a part of what Dr. King represented. We can talk about Brother Al Sharpton, we can talk about Muhammad Ali, we can talk about a whole lot of folk, but I think that a lot of us, a lot of people that are right around you, sitting in your home, on the screen, listening to us today, have a part and a piece of Dr. Martin Luther King.
Okay.
I can go ahead.
Dozie, if you'll let me chime in some of the comments. We had some words from that Dr. Eric Dyson was mentioned, Van Jones was mentioned, and I like when I like to think when John Lewis name as well. None of them, I think, equal on the same level with Dr. King, but just throw some of those names out. Neither though none of them are actually advocates and speak out as much. But Van Jones and Dr. Eric Dyson, Michael Eric Dyson, and my own is John Lewis. Just want to throw those names out there. Honorable mention.
Well, I love your choice of Dr. Eric Michael Eric Dyson. Love it. He has a great book out on rice. We might have to see if Dr. Holton can help us to get him on for a brief moment. I like what he's doing. But I'm just excited to hear somebody on this panel. Okay, Doug, 1 second. I'm excited to hear somebody on this panel bring up other names. We've already established there will not be another Dr. King likely in our lifetime. The Almighty can do what he wants to do. But he was just one of a kind. He was a preeminent leader in this nation. I'm talking about above presidents, potentates, everybody. He had the total package. But I don't think there's a vacuum for leadership. I think we have to select leadership who fits what we need. So with that being said, I've asked, Dr. Kearse, can you make a very short comment?
It's very short. I just actually wanted to dovetail on something that Ms. Grimes said earlier. part of Dr. King's, I think, power is that he was produced at a time when so many things came together, the confluence of the environment and things almost haven't had to respond with a Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And I think that the times that we live in now very well may be approaching that critical mass where God is going to move upon a voice. He always have the voice of one crying in the wilderness. So I just wanted to dovetail back on something she had said earlier, that the times helped to produce Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. With a moral voice. And I think we are at that point now that we may soon see someone raised up by God.
Amen. Amen. Kim, what we gonna do now? Jan came on last week and stole the show. She's also our cousin Janice Hazel. She's had, like Daisy, she's had awesome experiences working under several congresspersons, Shirley Chisholm, the late Shirley Chisholm, and late John Conyers, and others. And she's going to give a brief, just kind of tell us what it took to get the King holiday here, because she did a lot of work herself. And after she would have done that, Kim, throw out the next question, please. It'll lead right into it.
Gotcha.
Bless you, Jan.
Well, good evening to everyone. It's been a very, very interesting conversation. And I definitely I can't wait until you have a show on reproductive rights. Right, Cousin Daisy? Reproductive right? So I'm very spirited, and I can't wait for that. But thank you, Cousin Dozie, for bringing me on. And I just wanted to give a shout out to my former boss, which was Congressman John Conyers. I'm in Detroit, but I spent 30 years or more in Washington, D.C., working for members of Congress. As you said, the former Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm, Senator Donald Regal of Michigan, and Congressman John Conyers of Michigan, who was an architect of the Voting Rights Act and many other civil rights pieces of legislation through the years. And so when we talk about Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, there are a number of other people who come into play. And today, observing this national federal holiday is because of the foresight, tenacity, and perseverance of Congressman John Conyers, who authored legislation to observe Dr. King's birthday, January 15th, every year. He authored that legislation 4 days after Dr. King was assassinated. And he continued to reintroduce that legislation for 15 years, from 1968 until 1983. And unfortunately, every year, either it didn't get to the floor for a full vote, or it got to the floor and was voted down. In 1979, most notably, it was voted down by only 5 votes. It lost by 5 votes. However, in 1983, and I was working for him in 1983, the legislation did not get voted out of committee. And so a freshman congresswoman, who was Congresswoman Katie Hall of Indiana, the first Black woman who was elected to the Indiana congressional delegation, she was the chairwoman of the Post Office and Civil Service Subcommittee on the Census. And not to get too far into the weeds on legislation, what she did was a very crafty political maneuver was to introduce another piece of legislation to make the third Monday of every January an observance of Dr. Martin Luther King. Remember, Congressman John Conyers' legislation was to observe Dr. King's birthday on his birthday, January 15th. But a lot of members of Congress talked about the amount of money that would take, and it was just no way that was going to pass. So during her subcommittee hearing, the summer of 1983, I was sitting in committee with Congressman Conyers, sitting right next to him, and she introduced it. She was able to get the bill discharged under suspension of the rules from the committee. So that was a political maneuver to move it from the subcommittee to the full committee, move it out and get it to the floor for a vote. And it passed. It passed, and Ronald Reagan, president at that time, signed it into law in November of 1983. And the first observation of the federal holiday was in January 20th of 1986. And today marks the 35th anniversary of the Dr. Martin Luther King holiday. I give great merit to Congressman John Conyers for seeing it through for 15 years and for tossing the ball to another congressperson to get it out of committee, to get it voted on. And I give great deference to all of those people who helped out, the coalition that Congressman Conyers put together. Mrs. Rosa Parks, who worked for Congressman Conyers. She was unemployed and near being penniless in Alabama, having gone through the civil rights protest for the bus boycott. She moved to Detroit, and Congressman Conyers employed her from 1968 until she retired in 1988. And I had the chance to work with Mrs. Parks. I was her bodyguard whenever she would come to Washington, because she was a very petite person, and I would always keep all of the fans away from her. And also people like Berry Gordy, who is the founder of Motown, who helped to fund the movement of the civil rights movement and recorded the recordings in Detroit, the first recording of the Great March to Freedom, 1963, before the Great March on Washington. So just a historical footnote. Thank you for having me come on to just give you a little perspective on how it came to be that we are observing his birthday on a national platform. And I also want to just remind people that Stevie Wonder played a great part in getting this legislation passed. In 1981, Stevie Wonder was brought into the fold by Congressman Conyers. He wrote the Happy Birthday song that we all know, and you all can sing to me tomorrow, which is my birthday. And he gave some elevation.
All right.
He gave some elevation to what Congressman Conyers was doing. And there were numerous marches in Washington, observations in the cold before the birthday was actually observed. And Stevie Wonder, the 20th anniversary of the March on Washington, brought that song forward, and we still use that song today. So just a historical footnote. Thank you so much. And again, I will be listening closely for your conversation on reproductive rights, which is the correct way to frame that. Thank you, and have a wonderful evening.
Wow. I'm glad I don't have to respond with a comment. I just got to respond with a question after Janice get through book. And she be on point, and she just eat it up. So
Great job.
That's a Mayfield. That's some DNA from the Mayfield family. What can I say?
That's right. That's right. My grandmother
Janice came on last week and shut it down, so she just continued to do what she do, So, cousin Janice, I want to tell you happy birthday, happy early birthday to you. Thank you for your comments.
Happy birthday, cousin.
Thank you.
And I'm glad I don't have to comment. Follow you up with a comment. I can just follow you up with a question. So the next question, after years of pushing for a commemoration of Dr. King's birthday, what were your sentiments on the very first King holiday? And that's anyone on the panel to answer. What was your sentiments on the very first King holiday after you heard cousin Janice talk about how it came about? So,
I'm going to follow my cousin. I was working for Congress at that time. I was working in the district office in Fort Lauderdale and in the office in Washington also. And as I stated earlier, I was working for a Republican congressman. And it was interesting how we worked together to get him to support it. But I think the greatest feeling I had was that he allowed me, he was on program for the first official Martin Luther King Day program in Broward County. And he allowed me to read and present the piece of legislation that made it a legal holiday. And I would never forget how I felt having the opportunity to do that. And we did that at Mount Olive Baptist Church. And Congressman E. Clay Shaw said, Daisy, you can do this. He said, I will go with you, but I will let you present it. And it
Oh,
was an
wow.
awesome feeling to be able to do that.
Wow.
And I want to commend Janice for that refreshing course on what really went on trying to get this birthday a legal holiday.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
a
yeah.
memory of those times.
Hey, Kim, Dr. Minshew was I don't know, you probably didn't get it, but he was right there in Memphis shortly after the assassination, and some of the, after, and grew up basically there. Won't you see how he, get his opinion on that?
Go ahead, chime in, Dr. Minshew, if you will.
I think that the commemoration of Martin Luther King's birthday probably felt like more of a victory to the African American community because it affirmed the whole substance of the civil rights movement. But for those who were just gospel believers, we would have affirmed it much as President Reagan did by his signature, that this is something that is part of our cultural heritage. This is something that is part of the DNA of who the United States of America is now. And so I welcomed it from that perspective, that now we have actually affirmed something that is part of who we are.
Wow.
Awesome.
I don't know. I'm not sure if, and I'm sure everybody remembers, there were several states that said they wouldn't honor his birthday once it was, that was passed. And I think Arizona was one of them. And I don't know if they honor it there in Arizona now or not, but there are some states that said that they wouldn't honor his birthday. Anybody want to chime in on that comment?
Well, Arizona lost the Super Bowl because
yeah, they did.
It sure did.
And I think that economic impact hit home, and a lot of states that was still holding on. I think Mississippi was one of those states. They say, "Hey, we can't lose that." So
yeah, that's millions of dollars. Yeah,
I think Dr.
I work for the NFL, and that's millions of dollars right there when the NFL passes on the Super. When they pass on the Super Bowl.
That's right. Money talk.
I know. Some municipalities choose not to recognize daylight savings time, and that's something that people shouldn't recognize anyway. That thing is horrible. But a holiday that's gonna memorialize an American is a really great thing. And it doesn't matter if it's Dr. King, if it's Malcolm X, no matter who it is. If it's an American citizen that was doing something good for Americans, every state should recognize it. But I mean, at the same time, I'm kind of libertarian, and I push towards states' rights, and I think that people should do what they want to do. And if you want to support not celebrating Dr. King's birthday, then that's fine. I mean, I had to go to work today. A lot of other people had to go to work today. It's just a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it was first observed. The last state in the Union was New Hampshire. New Hampshire, as late as 2000, was not observing the holiday. Arizona, you're absolutely right, was the holdout. And I think, Kim, you mentioned the football team. Well, the NFL actually, which is dominated by Black men, Black players, they effectively held a protest, which is interesting that in later years, in 2016 forward, the NFL had a problem with their players taking a knee. But in effect, NFL players pushed the NFL to boycott the state of having, I guess, the Super Bowl or other things in Arizona, which I think helped to move the needle. So Arizona came on board to observe the Martin Luther King holiday in 1992. And in 2000, New Hampshire came on board to observe it. Different states were observing Martin Luther King holiday in combination with other days, but the people in this country wanted to see one day in particular observed, not commingled with anything else. And so that brings us to the present.
What we're going to do now, he is a guest host. I mean, he's one of the guest hosts. But did we lose Dr. Holton? I was going to direct this. So, well, let me just throw this out to the panel, and then we're going to give just a brief after a couple of you all give response to this, very brief responses. We're going to come back and do let you take 25 seconds and just kind of give a closing remark, and then we're going to close out the show a little differently tonight than we normally do. And this is the question: what bridges does America still have to cross in order to bring about Dr. King's beloved community? And anybody can just take a swipe at that.
Intolerance. We still need to cross the bridge of intolerance, and the bridge of we still have to love our neighbor, which our neighbor of any color, creed, sexual orientation, etc. There's still a lot of intolerance in this country, and I think that's the bridge that we have yet to cross, to tolerate other people who are different in any kind of way from ourselves.
Love it, love it. Anybody else?
I fully agree with that, but I would like to take it a little bit further and say that in addition to tolerating each other, we need to actually view each other as brothers and sisters trying to do better for each other, and we need to hold each other to our own high standards of personal interactions. Like if I have this ideal that I'm gonna be good to people, and for today I'm not good to somebody, I want somebody to come up and say, hey, maybe you weren't as nice as you wanted to be. Yeah, we should be nice to each other, but we should also hold each other to our own standards.
Thank you.
You know, I always like to say that an apple don't fall too far from the tree, and we know that hate is not inherited; it's taught. So apple don't fall too far from the tree. So we just need to stop growing them hate trees, man. You know, and just you know, that's the bottom line. We just stop spreading the hate. Start loving each other. You know, I don't care what color you are, what, no matter what you are, if you're on this earth as human being, start showing love to each other. Stop growing them hate trees, you know? And, you know, that apple won't fall too far from the tree. We won't have to worry about if it falls far from the tree or not, you know?
I guess the problem I would have is that the ideals that Martin Luther King proclaimed were ideals of the gospel, rooted in a belief in Jesus Christ as Savior and Lord. And we live in a world where people do not have that as the basis of their life. And to believe that they are actually going to live out those principles of love and acceptance of people without an embracing of Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior is never going to happen. And so for the legacy of Dr. King and what he believed to live out, the gospel has to be proclaimed, and people have to come into a loving relationship with Christ first.
So what do you say to atheists, Mr. Minshew? How do you say to atheists that
Yeah.
don't believe in Christ?
What I say is that they don't have a basis for being able to live out the truth that Martin Luther King was proclaiming. Because the basis of everything he had was rooted in the scripture and rooted in the gospel. And there was never a time that he stood up to speak truth when the truth was not rooted in God's truth.
Wow, that's good. That's good.
Yeah. Dozie, I think I have to agree more with Janice Hazel. I think intolerance. We have to learn to be more intolerant. We live in a country today that if you don't believe what I believe, I don't think you're right. And that's one, I think, a major issue. We have to be intolerant. We have to accept people for who they are, whether they're Christians, whether they're Muslims, whether they're Buddhists, or whatever. And I won't get into that as it relates to the scripture, but I think that, you know, we have to move in that direction of total love, agape love. I love you in spite of what your beliefs are. I love you as an individual, and I respect the fact that you have the right to think the way you want to think. But we can still love each other, and we can still work together for the common good.
So Sister Daisy Grimes, in about 3 or 4 weeks, we're going to be inviting this entire panel back, headed by you and Sister Janice Hazel.
Yeah, I need Janice on with me, but
Brother
he,
Hubert, Brother Doug Kearse, Brother Minshew, Brother Barry, and we're gonna have this conversation. All right, we're gonna deal with it. Okay, go ahead, Doug, and we got to get out of here.
You know what? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Doug. You're muted,
Hello,
bro.
can you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you now.
Oh, you guys hear me now?
Very brief, yes.
Hello. Okay.
Bro. We got you.
Dr. Minshew, I agree with what he said, because a question that I asked in this brief, what color was Cain? I asked that question for a reason. Cain killed his brother. Obviously, he didn't do it because of race, but the Bible says he did it because he was of that evil one, the devil. Hence why Jesus told Nicodemus, you must be born again. As a gospel preacher, that is what I believe. I believe that people are born with hate in their heart because they have a place in them. Jesus said, the devil has no place in me. Jesus is the only one who could say that. The devil most definitely has a place in everyone else. And the only remedy is to be born again, given a new heart. Therefore, if anyone be in Christ, he is a new creature. Old things have passed away. Behold, all things have become new. And we all make a critical mistake when we look at the world through the lenses of America, and we forget about all of the wickedness that has always transpired amongst humanity all across the world every century. And there's a reason for that. People are born in sin and shaped in iniquity. And until they repent and believe on the Lord Jesus Christ, that's the state that they will remain in. And you can read Romans chapter 2 to see what becomes of those who don't believe it per se. And you can shake your head all you want, but that's what people been doing down through the years, shaking their head and not believing that you must be born again. Now that's what I believe. That's what I believe.
Go ahead,
I believe
Daisy.
you have to be born again. I do believe that.
Okay, so we've already, and I'm just gonna tell you, instead of me doing an individual invite, I'm gonna put you all on the spot and say we want at least everybody here back on this panel, and we'll work out the date, everybody, so that we can.
You gonna have me back, Dozie?
Yeah, everybody. We want to deal with this issue of intolerance. You just kind of put a blanket over kind of some of the things I wanted to do. Listen,
I got to deal with
I got to get back with Daisy now. Don't leave Daisy out.
I'm gonna come on unless Janice is on with me. I need another female on with me.
Yeah, we got to deal with Reverend Kearse.
Yes,
for you.
Listen,
Dr. Minshew, you got to help me, sir.
Amen, brother.
In the interest of time, would you please, everybody, thank you so very much on this night that I knew there was so much you could be doing. My brother was late because he was doing something, but you kind of reserved your time here. And I think, Dr. Minshew, if I'm not mistaken, this is your anniversary weekend?
No.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, I know you wanted to be, okay. All right. Take 25 seconds, everybody. Just give a closing statement, and we're going to get out of here, please, if you don't mind.
We'll start with Cousin Daisy. Cousin Daisy, if you want to start it off.
Okay. I want to thank you for inviting me on. I've enjoyed this panel. It was really exciting and interesting, and it's always good to be with people with different views. But that's what makes this world better, and let us continue to work for the good.
Thank you, Cousin Daisy. Dr. Minshew, you want to chime in?
You know, I'm a kid who grew up in a segregated middle Georgia, moved to a polarized Memphis, Tennessee 4 months after Dr. King was assassinated, lived in the Mid-South until I went to Africa, and I spent 10 years in post-apartheid Namibia. I've had a chance to learn about the races and about the pain of polarization. And so it's always a privilege when I can get together with people who want to talk about progress and about how we can come together. And That is the legacy of Martin Luther King, was calling us out to be who we should be.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Kearse?
Thank you. I too, like my dear sister Grimes, am so happy to have been a part of this, to be stretched, to be challenged, to have a diversity of ideals and approaches. And I can remember being a young boy watching my mother cry at the assassination of John Kennedy, cry at the assassination of Bobby Kennedy, cry when Dr. King was assassinated, and trying to make sense of it all as a youngster and a teenager and a young adult. And then to have his work commemorated in the national holiday, one small step for man and one giant step for mankind. And I'm just thankful for what the Lord used him to do, because things are not perfect, but in my view, they certainly are better, much better than they were, though there's much work left to be done. So that is my take on his legacy.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Cousin Janice?
I would say that I'd like to sum up the evening. Thank you again so much for having me. And I look forward to hearing more dialogues with Dozie and Kim and others. I want to end with some of Dr. King's quotes. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And the time is always right to do the right thing. I think if we can end on those notes, it's always the right time to do the right thing, not only when you're being noticed, but in those moments in the dark, it's always the right time to do the right thing.
That's right. That's right. All right. And Barry Farmer, if you want to chime in, please, sir.
Yes, sir. I'd like to leave us and the viewers with a thought that Dr. King mentioned about preaching about slaves and slavery. He mentioned something about Pharaoh was able to keep slaves by keeping the slaves infighting amongst themselves, and our elected officials have been having us go at each other for generations now, and it's embedded in our culture and who we are, and we're kind of bred to say, I don't like you because you make too much money, you drive this type of car, you wear this type of clothes, or whatever music you listen to, whatever it is, I don't like you because of this. And I would encourage everybody that's watching today and all of our panelists to just think about that. Dr. King said that if all the slaves stop fighting among themselves, Pharaoh no longer has slaves. Just like our federal government will not have us as slaves paying their taxes, fighting their wars, and doing stuff that we don't want, that doesn't better our own personal lives. And if Dr. King was one man, they take him down. But as a nation of individuals, they can't remove all of us from our life.
Amen. Amen.
Wow. Thank you, sir. Dozie, I'm going to chime in with mine, and then I'm going to let you sum it up at the end. Basically, all I'm going to say is, for y'all that don't know, I'm a retired police officer. And when I used to tell guys that I trained on the department, I was out there before the body cameras came about. So body cameras just came out a couple of years ago. But I was training officers before the body cameras came out. And I used to tell them, hey, man, police this community as if somebody was watching you on a camera. So if you police it like you're watching on the camera, you're gonna do it the right way, I think. So I want to also add in that Brother Muhammad did chime back in and said that the reparations to the King family were for $100 for that settlement, for $100. So of course it was a different time then. $100 was a lot more money, but still that's no money. And I'll end it by saying this: we have a saying at my church that we talk about the religious aspects of everything. I'll end it by saying this. We like to say, hate the sin, but love the sinner. And I'll say that and sum it up with that.
Amen. This has been awesome. My hats off and appreciation to everyone that sacrificed to be with us tonight. God bless you. And to our viewers, this same panel will be back in about 6 weeks, I think, looking at the schedule. Just got to square it out with all of them. we want to deal with the issue of intolerance, and that'll cover a whole multitude. And we want you to be here. Toya, go ahead and keep the panel on. I'm going to need their prayers with the way we're going to close out tonight. We want you to remember that we are sponsored by GoBlackInc.com. That Toya is our niece and our daughter. She's our producer, and she does an awesome job. If I was in church right now, I would just say, if you think so, give her a hand clap. Amen. And we just thank her. That's Go Black Inc. Thank you. GoBlackInc.com. She does the Dialogue with Dozie show. She does a lot of shows over the internet, and you contact on their website, and she can hook you up. Marketing, anything you need is for, particularly anything virtually now during this season and beyond. She can do it for you, and we just thank her tonight for what she's done. And next week, we're going to have transplant recipients. One of those recipients is going to be, one of our guests is going to be Brother Gordon Harris, who was one of the deacons in the church I pastored up in Sterling, Illinois, who actually had a heart transplant. And he and others, and we're going to have some caseworkers to discuss that whole process. It's going to be a very fascinating, interesting show. Who knows? We may be, or somebody in our family, might be Dr. Kearse. I know you're familiar with the subject, may be in this position. So that's next week. We're asking you to join us with this. I wanted to end the show tonight with Dr. King's recitation of a medley of crescendos of his greatest, the last three speeches, or his greatest speeches. I Have a Dream, The Drum Major Instinct, which was the last sermon that he preached at the Ebenezer Church, and then the last speech that he preached, that he spoke on April the 4th, April the 3rd at the Masonic Temple there in Memphis, Tennessee. But a lot of the things that we tried to do were not going to meet the Facebook police. So since I am a preacher, and I used to do this as a kid, bear with me for 2 or 3 minutes. That's how we're going to close out the show tonight. I'm going to recite some of these, the crescendo of those 3 oratorical gems. And I need your prayers because I haven't done this in quite a while, okay? And I'm going to start with the I Have a Dream speech. In spite of the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream. I have a dream that one day my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day down in Alabama, with this vicious racist, with this governor having the lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification, one day, right there in Alabama, little black boys and little black girls will be able to join hands with little white girls and little white brothers, as brothers and sisters. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day every valley will be exalted, and every hill and every mountain shall be made low. The rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight, and the glory of the Lord will be revealed and all poured out and all together. And they were telling me, now it doesn't matter now. Well, I want to leave that for last. But the last sermon that he actually preached at the Ebenezer Church, it was called The Drum Major Instinct, and I want to do the excerpt from it. Every now and then, I guess we all think realistically about that day when we'll be victimized by what is called life's final common denominator. That's something we call death. We all think about it. Every now and then I think about my own death, and I think about my own funeral, and I don't think of it in a morbid sense. And every now and then I ask myself, what is it that I would want you to say? And I want to leave the word with you this morning. If any of you are around when I have to meet my day, I don't want a long funeral. If you get someone to deliver the eulogy, tell them not to talk too long. But every now and then I wonder, what is it that I would want them to say? Tell them not to mention that I have a Nobel Peace Prize. And that's not important. Tell them not to mention that I have some 200 or 300 other awards. That's not important. Tell them not to mention where I went to school. But I'd like for someone to mention that day that Martin Luther King Jr. tried to give his life serving others. I'd like for someone to mention that day that Martin Luther King Jr. tried to love somebody. I want you to say that day that I did try to be right on the war question. I want you to be able to say that day that I did try to feed the hungry. I want you to be able to say that on that day that I did try in my life to clothe the naked. I want you to be able to say on that day that I did try in my life to visit those who were in prison. I want you to be able to say that I did try to love and serve humanity. Yes, if you want to say that I was a drum major, say that I was a drum major for justice, that I was a drum major for peace, that I was a drum major for righteousness, and all the other shallow things will not matter. I won't have a lot of money and a lot of luxurious things to leave behind, but I just want to leave a committed life behind. And that's all I want to say. If I can help somebody as I pass along, if I can help somebody through a word or song, if I can show somebody that they're traveling wrong, then my living will not be in vain. If I can do my duty as a Christian art, if I can bring salvation to a world once wrong, if I can spread the message as the master taught, then my living will not be in vain. And ultimately, on the 3rd of April, his last oratory, and they were telling me, now it doesn't matter now. They were telling me that when we left Atlanta on the plane this morning, and there were 6 of us, the pilot said over the public address system to be sure that all of the bags were checked, and to be sure that nothing would be wrong with anything on the plane. We had to check out everything carefully, and we had the plane protected and guarded all night. Then when I arrived into the city of Memphis, some began to say the threats, and about the threats that were ours. What would happen to me from some of our sick white brothers? Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead, but it really doesn't matter to me now because I've been to the mountaintop, and I don't mind like anybody. I'd like to live a long life. Longevity has its place, but I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will, and he's allowed me to go up to the mountain, and I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you today, but I'm here to tell you tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not fearing anybody. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
Wow. Good job, Dozie. Good job.